You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. So I learned who the White Sox were this week. I think anybody paying attention now knows who the White Sox are, what the organizational philosophy is, how the front office is going to operate underneath the miserly owner that owns the team. I think that
they have revealed themselves.
Yeah, it became really obvious. I think if you're paying attention to what happened this week with the move of Garrett Crochet, who a big boy team probably doesn't trade, because they're going to make a turnaround quicker, they're going to spend some money, they're going to get out there and make some moves, and they've got control over them over a couple of years, but this is how the White Sox are going to have to operate. They trade Crochet, and what they get back and what they're looking for is about what we've been talking about. They looked for guys who were impact that could probably be here in the majors this year or by midway through this year, and one of the big pieces in that trade, Braden Montgomery, could be here as early as 26 at some point. At the latest 27, and he's the one you kind of have to wait a little bit for, but he's advanced. Even though he's going to start off an A-ball, he's a very advanced hitter. So they went out and got guys who have an accelerated path to the majors. I felt like the guys they went out and got, every report I read about them, Ed, is that they're all bat first, not power first, if that makes sense. Like they're going to get on base, right, and they're going to get hits over power, although Montgomery could turn into a big thumper and a power guy in the middle of your lineup. But that seemed to be what they were picking up in the other two players they got in Teal and Meadroth. Meadroth could be here to start the year. We're going to get into that with Elijah Evans from Just Baseball and FutureSox later on here on this show. And they even did a good job with their Rule 5 pickup. What they're doing is they're identifying guys that their hitting guru, Ryan Fuller, wants to work with, or their pitching guru, Brian Bannister, wants to work with. There's a reason those guys were at the winter meetings. There's a reason why I believe that they are heavily involved in player evaluation and what Chris Getz is doing. He gave interviews throughout the week where he talked about how they give their input. He makes the final decision. Of course, he's the general manager, but they give their input. He seems like a guy who's listening. But the thing that I really got at this point is this is a mid-market team. No matter the fact that we are in the city of Chicago, and it should not be a mid-market team, this is a mid-market team, and the owner is going to operate it as such until the day he's dead, because he's not selling. So until he dies, this is what the White Sox are, and this is what the White Sox always were, except Kenny Williams stubbornly believed that the old man would come through in the end when he needed him, and a lot of times he got let down. And Rick Hahn believed that the old man would come through, that the money would be spent, but the old man came short. And what this philosophy seems to be is Chris Getz knows his owner and is going to operate his team more like the Guardians, like the Twins, like the Rays, like teams that have to get creative in terms of turning over high-level talent to get more talent that continues to come through the system, have more than just one guy earmarked for each position on the field. And if that guy doesn't work out, your team takes a dive. No, have multiple guys for multiple positions, give an awful lot of chances for one of them to rise to the top like cream in your coffee, and then build a team that way. And it may not be a big payroll, and your hope is that he builds a nucleus and builds something that competes, and then when he goes to the old man and he wants a little bit of money, it's within the budget that he can get.
Well, and it's a smart way to go, and I understand the argument about this being the third biggest market, and the Sox should be a team that spends. But let's face it, there's really two levels that you want to be at to be successful in Major League Baseball right now. And one of them is you can be one of the halves. You can be the Mets, you can be the Dodgers, you can be the Yankees, who can go out and make offers for Juan Soto. Realistic offers, okay? The Red Sox fall in there as well. There's a few other teams. Or you got to be a team like what Chris Getz seems to be building, which is the ones that are creative, the ones that utilize roster assets, minor league assets, a little bit of money here and there, but for the most part are trying to cull talent from everywhere they can get it, right? From any source, and develop it, and you're going to have some roster turnover. You're going to have guys like Garrett Crochet arrive and then go, and you're going to be a little bit ruthless with your with your roster. I mean, Andrew Vaughn notwithstanding right now, where we have question marks about why he's still around, but this idea that you're going to build a team of superstars on the south side of Chicago is not realistic because, frankly, first of all, it costs a lot of money to do it. It's not that Jerry doesn't have it, but there's only a handful of owners that are really willing to spend that, okay? And where you don't want to be caught is you don't want to be caught in between, right? Like I'm looking at, like, say, the Cubs and the Phillies right now, or, pick anybody else in the AL East that's not the Yankees and Red Sox. Even the Red Sox, I think, fall into it. The Padres fall into this, where they seem to be able to absorb large contracts, but then they can't necessarily do it all the way across the diamond, and they can't absorb enough big money to really make a team, a full team, and put a full team on the field every day of superstars or high-priced veterans. So you got to be that team that comes up with this stuff. And Garrett Crochet, there's a couple of things that Chris Getz did there. One is they did not trust Garrett Crochet. They didn't trust his personality after that whole debacle where he said he was demanding an extension if he got traded at the deadline for some reason. Clearly, there's some question marks that are always going to linger about that man's mechanics and his durability and his ability to hold up as a starting pitcher. It's just one of those things where he got hot. He figured it out. He proved that he could be a starter. And yeah, maybe he goes on for the Red Sox and spends the next decade dominating. It's also possible that he goes out for the Red Sox and spends a couple of years doing okay and then blows his arm like Chris Sale did after they traded him. Where Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams also went wrong was stubbornly holding on to talent and expecting them to rise to the level of superstar instead of sitting there saying, let me pick up a second baseman who's got a great ability to get on base, doesn't strike out. I mean, walks more than he strikes out in every level that he's ever played at.
When we're talking about Meadroth there, who's the third guy in this deal and is probably your starting second baseman.
Exactly. Now you've got a legitimate starting second baseman and a guy that might be your legitimate table setter and leadoff hitter. You still have Luis Robert Jr. in your lineup, so it'd be nice for him to have somebody on base in front of him, even if the guy doesn't steal a ton or whatever.
Oh, and then they get Mike Tauchman.
Then they've got Mike Tauchman.
He's probably the leadoff hitter on this team.
Right. So you could see Tauchman, Meadroth, Robert, and then you could see man on first and second, nobody out Luis Robert a lot more often than he did last year.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Meadroth is young. He probably starts off at the bottom of the lineup. We'll ask Elijah Evans about it. We'll see. But I mean, like that,
yeah.
He may be that two-hitter. He may be a guy who starts off at the bottom of the order, but I get what you're saying. He's a guy who gets on base. In fact, all these guys get on base.
And there's a philosophy that's developing, right? Ryan Fuller is brought in to be the batting guru, and what are they doing? They're launching guys, first of all, for money purposes, obviously, but an Eloy Jimenez, unreliable in terms of being on the field, had turned into a guy who was low average, selling out for power. You don't want him around. Gavin Sheets. There was a guy that was low average, low power, as it turned out, but allegedly selling out for power. They don't want that type of hitter. They want guys that have a hit tool so that they can sustain offense, because you also have a ballpark that you play to, right? Looking at, like, say, Kyle Teal, they say, doubles hitter, he's got some pop, might be able to hit 20 home runs. I'm sitting there going, yeah, he's going to be a monster at home, and on the road, he's going to be a guy that, settles into something in the gaps. But if you're doing that, that's fine. If you've got an offensive identity, that's great. And I think they're building a pitching identity too. They're building, results over process, right? They're not looking for tools. They're looking for guys that have gotten results. Drew Thorpe, Jairo Iriarte, and now Wickelman Gonzalez, all guys who strike out a lot of guys. Whatever control problems, whatever they're looking, they need to tweak, do this, blah, blah, blah. Like you said, Elijah can get in the scouting report, but results, right? Drew Thorpe led the minors in strikeouts before he was traded to the White Sox. They're looking for guys who know how to play the game, too.
For exterior windows, doors, patio doors, and storm doors, look no further than Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. No high-pressure sales, not showing up in your living room. Instead, go in and see them in their beautiful showroom with an owner on site in every single example there in full living color. No pictures in a book. And then when the install happens, it's all their own installers and another owner on site. They never farm out the work, and they're there to make sure it's done right. 40 years in Oak Forest since 1985. They've been doing it that long this way, and all major brands are custom made. No stock items, for a perfect fit. Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest is a half block east of 159th and Ridgeland at 6280 159th Street. See more at windowdooroakforest.com. And joining me on the phone line right now from FutureSox and Just Baseball, a good friend of the show, Elijah Evans is on the line. How are you, Elijah?
Doing good, Chris. How about yourself?
I'm great, man. I actually am happy with this trade. I know that on the last episode of Sox in the Basement, when the rumor was that Marcelo Mayer would be included, or at least the Red Sox were open to it, I said, yeah, because I love shortstops. High-level prospect shortstops can go anywhere. If he doesn't work out at short, he could be standing at third. He could be standing at second. He could be in center field. Like, generally, if you're athletic enough to play that position, I feel more confident in that prospect. But I also feel like if you were going to get him, if the White Sox were going to get Mayer, they probably don't get a lot of high-level guys behind him. And this was more of a bunch of guys that could all work out. You get 2 or 3 of them to work out of the 4. These are solid prospects. It's a good package to me. What did you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, man. I think it's a complicated situation, right? Because you don't want to trade Crochet. Everybody's hesitant. Everybody's going to be upset regardless to a degree with the package. But I'm happy to see that White Sox fans are keeping an open mind to this one and generally seem to be fairly excited about it because, Mayer is a good prospect, but at the same time, like, I think there was always going to be this, if you're getting one of those top 3, you're not getting a true second headliner, as opposed to this deal where you're getting 2 kind of co-headliners in a way where, yeah, Kyle Field's higher rated, but I think everybody who knows and has been up to date on his trajectory knows that Braden Montgomery is the one in this deal who has that true, elite upside per se. So I think the trade-off of not getting a Mayer or a Christian Campbell in terms of those top guys who, your infielders, you can plug in your lineup today, kind of, they're ready to go, right? You get 2 guys that are both going to be, key pieces for the future, in addition to a third piece in Chase Niedroff, who can come up and be part of this lineup pretty much immediately for the White Sox as well. So I think it's a balanced deal, which I like. And I think that the fact that Kyle Teel, when it was first reported that it was Kyle Teel involved with more, right? That was the initial report. So part of me was like, Kyle Teel, why are we adding another catcher? Like, what is the logic there? But the more that I sat on it, and once I saw Braden Montgomery was included for the upside factor, right? I look at Teel as like, hey, it's really hard to find catching talent in Major League Baseball these days and consistent catching talent. And you've got 2 of the top catching prospects in baseball now. And if it becomes a platoon, awesome. If one of them takes kind of the lead in terms of their defensive ability and becomes the primary catcher, the other one shifts to first base, left field, DH, right? Like, it is not a bad idea to have 2 catching prospects right now for this organization. And I do think that both of them are going to be able to be at least part-time catchers in the future.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. We already have Edgar Caro, and everybody's saying, hey, he may come out of camp this year as a starting catcher. It seems to me, reading reports, and correct me if I'm wrong, Teel is probably not going to have as quick of a chance to get started right out the gate in 25 as what some people think Caro could do. But also, I'm seeing that Teel is got great framing. That seems to be very defensive-minded. The one report I read was also he's a hitter more than a power hitter. He's more of a get on base type hitter. And that seemed to be what all of these guys had. Like, in the thread of all of the 3 position players of the 4 players acquired in this deal, they all seem to be a bat that at least at this point is about getting hits and getting on base more than hitting it out of the ballpark, although Montgomery might become one of those hit it out of the ballpark guys. Did you see that trend? And is that a good way to kind of look at Kyle Teel?
Yeah, Kyle Teel for sure. He's definitely, I think there's still some work to do defensively. I think that he came into he was seen in college as an advanced catcher to an extent, right? But I think there is, he does have some work to do defensively. I think both still have some work to do defensively, but at the same time, they are both going to be, at the level of being able to catch the big leagues, I think. And like you said, Caro is going to be the more league ready one. I think Teel is going to take a little bit longer, but I think they'll both be up this year at one point or another for sure. And then, yeah, like you said, he's an on base guy, right? Teal's a guy that is impatient. He has experience at high level in college. He definitely is going to get on base. He's going to make strong contact. You're going to get some power from him, but you're not expecting big power from him, as opposed to Montgomery, where you are expecting big power. That's the hope. Montgomery is a decent on base threat, but I'd say he's definitely still power over hit. As opposed to Teel, who's hit over power. So I kind of like the tandem, right? Because Teel is a little bit more of that on-base threat. He's going to take his walks a little bit more consistently. He's going to be a guy that's going to, make solid contact. Montgomery's still a pretty good contact guy. He does make good hard contact as well. But with him, it's the tools. The tools are loud. He has, elite, 75, 80, a future grade type of power, right? That's the guy that you can look at and say, hey, he could be hitting 30 plus homers a year if things go well in his development along the next year or two from now. So they're both different hitters, but I think they complement each other well. They both, Montgomery's a switch hitter, right? Gil's a lefty, right? So I think you've got two hitters that are different and have their own strengths and are both still developing for sure. But two guys you look at and say, hey, like these can be cornerstone pieces for us. And I don't think there was many other deals out there where you were getting two legit prospects that you can look at hitting prospects particularly, right? Because the White Sox needed to get hitting talent in this trade. I don't think there was many deals out there where you can look and say, hey, there's two guys that can be a big part of the future here.
Well, let's talk about another guy in this package. The third guy, I think, in it is Chase Meadroth. And he in AAA last year at 293 with an 837 OPS. He's likely a second baseman. I know he's listed as just an infielder, I believe, on a lot of prospect lists. I did read that it might not be the best defense out there, or at least range-wise. That's why he projects to probably be a second baseman. But is he a guy who's ready? Like, will he compete for a job, you think, out of the gate? Did the White Sox find a second baseman, or at least one that they might try to start the year off with?
Yeah, I think Meadroth I think he starts on opening day, frankly. I really do, actually. 23 years old, fourth rounder 2 years ago in 2022 out of San Diego, right? This is a guy who is definitely performance. His numbers are strong, right? I think Meadroth is a guy that's probably not going to be, an elite big league player, right? He's a very low slug, right? He doesn't hit for much power. Last year, he had 7 home runs. He's not going to be a guy that's going to create a huge impact, I would say, in terms of like his upside. But with that said, right, walked 105 times last year, 71 strikeouts, stole some bases, good contact skills. Yeah, got on base over a 400 clip, right? So he's getting on base all the time. Very patient hitter, not a ton of power, but like that is a second base profile, right? Like you want a guy in this lineup. And I think the White Sox have done a very concentrated job over the past year now. And I think Chris Getz is really focusing on this with getting different types of hitters than we've seen in the past generation over the past decade, right? So Meadroth is one of many guys that have been brought in the recent year that has been, a sophisticated approach. He's going to give you a good at bat. He's going to take walks, and he's actually going to get on base. And that's something that I think the White Sox really, really, really needed in the last rebuild. That was a big factor of why that team didn't work, was there was not enough guys that could just get you on base and keep the line moving. And I think Meadroth is a guy that, he's probably an 8-9 hitter long term, right? Like I think he's your bottom of the order, second base, third base utility guy almost. But I think he's going to grab the second base job at least to start the season, have a very good chance to run away with it. And if not, he's going to get some innings for sure. I think whether it's the beginning of the season or not, it's sooner than later this season, we're going to see Meadroth getting some substantive innings for the White Sox. And now it's just a matter of, going into the spring training, there's some guys that got to prove it, right? I mean, Brian Ramos, Brooks Baldwin, they got to prove themselves if they want to be getting playing time over guys like, Meadroth and then some other guys that are going to be coming up soon. So it's going to be fascinating. The infield is still definitely up for grabs, but I think Meadroth is very much going to have his name in the picture of the starting infield this year.
There's only one guy in this foursome that came over from the Red Sox currently on the 40-man, and that's the last name, and that's Gonzalez, the right-handed pitcher that comes over. Is he a relief pitcher? Is he a guy that's got a chance to be in a rotation? What's his deal?
I think there's a chance he's going to be in the rotation. I mean, Gonzalez is a guy that in 2023, he shot from high A to double A, and then double A in 2023, he was at a 2.4 ERA and looked like he was, like he had 168 strikeouts last season in that 2023 season, and then looked the part of a future starter and a legit starter for Boston. This past season, his stuff regressed a little bit, backed up on him in double A. The walks got a little bit out. He had an injury he dealt with. He only threw 83 innings, right? But the stuff is really good. He's got a lot of swing and miss stuff. And, it was very, very clear on display 2023. Last year, not as much. But, in general, in double A at this point, a 22-year-old went on the 40-man to protect him, right? And is someone who I think now with a season and a half of double A experience, right? Like there's some things to correct there, but I think you're hoping that he can reach, triple A for a good chunk of this season. And then be looking at another, late season or potentially early 2026 option. As a starter, I think it's probably a long shot that he remains like a true long-term starter. Probably going to be more of a reliever. I think this year they'll still let him be a starter. I think they'll still try to develop him as a starter this year because he has been for, 4 full seasons now. He's been starting in the minors. So I think you try to keep him as a starter this year, but his stuff could really play up in the bullpen. And frankly, as the fourth piece of this deal, if he reaches the big leagues, even as a good reliever, right, that's already a win as your fourth add-in piece, right? And I think the White Sox pitching development is going to have another fun project here. And we've seen the past few years a lot of guys break out in the farm system on the pitching side. And this is just another talented arm with a lot of swing and miss stuff that you can throw into the fire and see what happens and work through it. And yeah, like I said, even if it's a reliever, that's a pretty great, fourth piece to get, right?
And then the White Sox got the first pick in the Rule 5 draft, and they get Shane Smith from the Brewers. And I read about this guy, and I see he's been used as a starter in the minors, and he's been used as a relief pitcher. He's clearly going to be in the bullpen this year because you got to keep him on the roster if you select him as a Rule 5. But it's also going to be a guy that Brian Bannister gets a crack at. So where do you see him? What did you think of that selection? What's his trajectory?
So Shane Smith is a guy that, when I first looked at him, I think I saw more of a reliever, more of a long reliever, a guy that can fill some innings for you, that had a pretty good productive minor league career so far to this point, and has consistently gone through each level and had high strikeout numbers too. But honestly, I think it sounds like the White Sox are considering him as a potential starter, which is tricky because there's a lot of really good starters in this organization right now. And I think there's going to be, a serious competition to grab starting rotation spots. But I do see him as a guy who's going to get a chance to push for it. His stuff probably plays better in a relief role. I think he has, pretty high strikeout numbers. He's generally maintained that. He's been able to, I think he had over almost 11 strikeouts per 9 last season in half starts, half relief appearances, right? So he's kind of had the balance of doing both. But at the very least, it's another good arm to have in the organization, and a guy that you can feel pretty comfortable with at the major league level, I think. Compared to a lot of guys that go in the Rule 5 draft, I think he has a little bit more consistency in terms of his experience the past few seasons. Looks like, the part of a big league arm at the very least. And is someone that if you want to try him as a starter, I think there's a world. I think his arsenal could play as a starter, but I also can see him being a very solid reliever. And there's really no downside for a team that's not going to be competing this year to keep a guy like Shane Smith in the bullpen, even if he doesn't grab a starter spot. And then you've got another solid bullpen piece to keep working on.
Awesome. Elijah Evans, he does so much, right? He's got Just Baseball. He's got the Call Up, which is a podcast, I believe, that you appear on from time to time. You're on FutureSox. You're doing a ton of stuff, and you just filled us all in on these new players. And I'll tell you this, I'm excited because they're doing something. There seems to be a plan. There seems to be a type of player that they're looking for, whether it be a pitcher or a hitter. They seem to have a type now. They seem to have a direction. They seem to have the guys in place doing the evaluations, and Getz just kind of looks over the gurus that are looking at the hitting and the pitching. And I think I felt that in this trade. I appreciate you breaking it down.
Yeah, 100%. Anytime. I'm excited too. I think it's there is a direction. I know it's frustrating. I know everybody wants it to be quicker, but it's exciting and it feels good to see a real direction happening right now with the White Sox.
And that music you hear, as always, is for the Sox Nerd, Dave Marin. He puts all those tidbits, those trivia nuggets up on the board at the rate during the year and year-round. He is here on Sox in the Basement, and he's brought to you by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont. Shop, dine, drink, explore, see everything they have going on. This is a great place for a day trip, an evening during the holiday season, all lit up. See it all and everything they're doing at LamontDowntown.com. Nerd, what do you got for me?
Chris, there have been a lot of White Sox comings, goings, and honors lately. Let's break it down. First, the going. Garrett Crochet, sent to Boston, is the only big league pitcher since at least 1901 to record 200-plus strikeouts and no more than 33 walks over his first 32 career starts. This after Tommy John surgery. As I stated on an earlier pod, I will miss the buzz Crochet brought to the park during his starts. For your information, the Red Sox make their annual trip to Guaranteed Rate Field April 11th through the 13th. Now the arriving. Mike Tauchman, signed on December 11th, he seems to be ticketed for right field. His splits tell us, though, center field is his best position. Tauchman has hit .278 with a .377 on-base percentage in his 119 games in center. In right field, those numbers read .241 and .353. Tauchman is also the only native of Palatine to play in the bigs, and he will join Rob Scahill, Mike Dunn, Guy Hoffman, and Don Sechrist as Bradley products to play for the Sox. Bradley, by the way, has sent a lot of talent to the Sox scoreboard room over the years, as has NIU. Kyle Teal, the 22-year-old catcher outfielder acquired in the Crochet blockbuster, led the Double-A Eastern League with a .298 average and topped Boston Farmhands with 78 RBI last season. Braden Montgomery, also a part of the Crochet swap, the outfielder was the Red Sox first-round pick last June. Prior to Montgomery, the last outfielder taken by Boston in the first round was Andrew Benintendi in 2015. In fact, the Sox have acquired 4 of Boston's last 11 first-round picks, with Teal and Michael Kopech being the others. Chase Meadroff, the middle infielder included in the Crochet deal, drew 105 walks for the Red Sox AAA affiliate last season. The last White Sox farmhand to walk that many times was Mark Johnson in 1998. The last Sox minor leaguer to post more than 105 bases on balls in a season was Johnson, who notched 106 the previous season. Wickelman Gonzalez, the only pitcher in the Crochet exchange, finished with a flurry for Boston's Double-A team in 2024. Over his last 12 outings, the righty recorded a 1.84 ERA and a 0.89 WHIP, while limiting foes to a 149 average. Shane Smith, picked up in the Rule 5 draft, Smith was on the same pitching staff at Wake Forest in 2021 as current Sox lefty Jared Schuster. And now the honored. Sox icon Dick Allen was finally elected to the Hall of Fame last week. Allen is the 35th Sox player to make the Hall and arguably the most popular player in team history. If you want a sense of what Allen and the recently passed Bill Melton meant to the Sox fans of the 70s, check out the 2 public posts on friend of the show Ed Sherman's Facebook page. Before I get to my zinger, a reminder, you can access my blog at soxinthebasement.com, and there is plenty of Sox Nerd material on Twitter, where I am still updating and tweaking Sox birthdays. My zinger? Speaking of Allen, he had many monumental home runs during his time on the South Side. There was a roofer, a bleacher blast, a grand slam, 2 in-the-park homers in the same game, and 3 walk-offs. His final Sox game ender came on May 28, 1973. Allen's blast in the 21st inning was the Sox' first homer hit in the 20th inning or later, and it finished a game against Cleveland that was suspended 2 days earlier because of the old AL 1 a.m. curfew rule. The resumption had to wait a day because of rain. Oh, and Allen clubbed that homer off a fresh-faced 23-year-old Chicagoan named Ed Farmer. That's it, Chris. More than you probably wanted to know about Palatine, Bradley, Mark Johnson, and the pride of St. Rita, Ed Farmer.
Teal becomes number 2 in terms of White Sox prospects according to MLB Pipeline. So you got Schultz is 1, Teal is 2, Hagen Smith is 3, Montgomery's 4, Colson Montgomery's 4, Braden Montgomery's 5, Edgar Caro is 6. All these guys are in the top 100 if I'm not mistaken. Iriarte's right outside that. He's their 7th best prospect. I mean, if you look at what is being added, what they're focusing on, the type of player, and again, I keep going back. I'm telling you, like, I know Braden Montgomery's the exciting part because he's got the big ceiling. Teal to me is exciting because what you're saying is we're not compromising anymore at the position of catcher. We're gonna have a catcher, and it's gonna be either Caro or Teal or both, and one of them can easily move to first. And Andrew Vaughn, get nervous, buddy, because you're gonna lose your job at first base to the guy that doesn't get catcher out of this if they're both good. And that's a guy who I think if he isn't out of the gate early this year, if he's halfway through the year and doing the same thing that he was doing last year, inconsistent replacement level at best, that'll be another test for Chris Getz, because I see him being unyielding in terms of this guy doesn't fit, it's time to move on from him. At some point, you got to see that with Andrew Vaughn. It's still the only questionable thing really this entire offseason for me, because I can't question how they're spending. The only person I can ask about that is Jerry Reinsdorf, because he's cheap, he's a miser, he's a terrible owner, and we'll all be better off when he's not around anymore owning this team. And until then, though, this is how a general manager should be operating within the constraints of his owner. And there are constraints. And at least there seems to be a plan now, the type of player, how you're going to spend the money, what you're going to do, and how you're going to try to find alternatives and operate like, unfortunately, a small to mid-market team. And that's what they're going to have to be. If you're going to turn it around, you start with infrastructure. That's what he's been doing. If you're going to turn around, you're going to change the way you scout. That's what he's been doing. If you're going to turn around, you're going to change your analytics. You're going to change how you develop. You're going to change who's making decisions. You're going to bring in outside voices. That's what he's doing. If you're going to turn around, you're going to flip a piece like Garrett Crochet, who you're not exactly sure about, and you know that because of the way the owner operates, you will not be able to use him in a competitive window because it's not going to open in time for when you have control of him and he's going to want money. You flip him for not 1 or 2 pieces. You flip him for 3 to 4, and they're ready. I mean, Teal, you're going to see. I think, this year. You're going to see Meadroth, I believe, possibly to start off the year at second base. And if not, he's going to be involved in the team. You're seeing talent immediately show up on the roster with your new manager. It's not perfect. It's not ideal. I wish they would go out and sign a big name. I still want that veteran bat that you can even flip. But go get me like a big free agent bat. You've got the money to spend on it. Give the guy a 2-year deal or a year with an option, and maybe that comes later. Like, that's the thing. If I'm Chris Getz in the early part of free agency and the offseason, this is how you'd want to operate, because something else is going to pop up later on or come available that you'll be able to sign, and you have plenty of payroll flexibility to do it and still stay at a very low level at the bottom of Major League Baseball, which is what your owner wants. And he might be able to go get that impact veteran bat that sits in the middle that he could flip later on. He may be able to go get that, a pitcher. He's definitely got to go out and get a starting pitcher now.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.